who's going to show up, the faithful few, on the day after a long evening. And some of you are thinking, Bryan, hurry up. We got naps to take. Some of you are thinking, hey, we got lunch. We have family events. But I'm glad that you're here. Welcome to Sunday morning. We're going to dive into Isaiah chapter 11 this morning, if you'd like to turn there. But a couple of things as I get started. Number one, your pastor is on vacation. Probably a much-needed vacation. He needed to get recharged before he starts the new year himself. So he's out of town. Please be praying for him. On Wednesday, when we had a community discussion about our church, one of the bright spots about our church is our pastor. It was mentioned that we have a great pastor, and I want to reinforce that this morning. You have an amazing pastor.
Amen. Amen.
Or we, rather, have an amazing pastor. I don't think that you know the extent to which he bends down and encourages our people on a weekly basis. But I want to honor him. And so when you get a chance, when he's back in town, make sure to tell him thank you for everything that he does. As we dive into the message this morning, 2016, let's think about it. I've had a lot of people tell me that 2016 was a hard year. How many of you that was true? 2016 was a difficult year. Okay? That's a lot of hands. In our church, the people that I talk to regularly, I had people tell me back in June, this is the hardest year that I've had in 10 years. And I'm like, I agree with you. I totally understand. And yet there are some bright spots. There are some amazing things that have happened this year. Some things that we as a church can celebrate, and in our families that we can celebrate. But generally speaking, it was a hard year. On social media, if you guys are following some of the Twitter posts, the Facebook posts, a lot of people have said, just get rid of 2016, give me 2017. I'll paraphrase to put it in a more appropriate language for us. 2016 didn't go as planned, so get yourself in gear for 2017 and we'll start over. And that seems to be a general sentiment that people are feeling about last year moving over into this year. And I don't disagree. But what does a calendar change actually do for us? You flip the calendar, you still have the same personal problems, you still have the same issues at work, you still have the same friendships that are struggling, you still have the same financial crises that you had in 2016. They still carry with you as you move into the new year. So what good is a calendar flip? When you flip the page to a new calendar, what good does that do? Some people have the outlook like John Keyes. But this long run is misleading. It's a guide in our current affairs. The long run that we run all ends in death. That's kind of morbid, right? People look at life and they say, there's really not much going for me, so in the end we all just die anyway. I prefer to take C.S. Lewis's approach. There are far better things ahead than any that we leave behind. As we move into 2017, we dive into Isaiah chapter 11. I'd like to encourage you with hope from the Messiah. Hope from the Messiah. Who is the Messiah? He is the anointed one. He's the long-awaited, long-expected one. He is the one that the Jews have been desiring to come for centuries. He is the one that comes out of the line of David. And he is the one that they were waiting to enter into Jerusalem as a prince upon his horse, as a king upon his valiant steed, charging in ahead of the army to come and overthrow their oppressors. And so many people were disappointed when Jesus was born in a manger in a lowly state. The Messiah was the one that was anointed to come and rescue humanity from its current issues, its current tribulations. Thinking back on last year, there was sickness, there were health issues, there was death, there were financial crises that many people faced, there were marital problems that people were going through, friendships that were breaking apart. And in light of all that, there is a Messiah that brings hope and peace. So dive in with me to Isaiah chapter 11. God, we pray that you would encourage us this morning. As we look into the text, as we read your word, Lord, that we would be inspired to new life. That you would encourage us to see how you can wash your peace over us in the midst of conflict, in the midst of trials, as we go through our regular lives, our regular routine. God, we see that you have a desire to change us from within. And we pray this morning that you would do that you would be alive and present, that your Spirit would speak to our hearts. And we thank you for this morning and for this text that will enrich our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. And then this kind of familiar idea. Verse 6, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fatted calf together. And the little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. And they shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Verse 10, in that day, the root of Jesse, who stands as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. In that day, the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elam, from Shinar and Hamath, and the coastlands of the sea. He will raise a signal for the nations, and will assemble the banished of Israel, and gather the dispersed of Judah. From the four corners of the earth, the jealousy of Ephraim shall depart, and those who harass Judah shall be cut off, and so on and so forth. All the nations will be gathered together under the signal of the Messiah, the shoot from the branch of Jesse. Now, the stump of Jesse, going back to verse 1, the stump of Jesse, think with me, if you remember the book, The Giving Tree. How many remember the book, The Giving Tree? Say it's a familiar child's book with some adult, very adult applications for life. I just say that. If you want to go back and reread The Giving Tree after this morning's message, I would encourage you to do so. But The Giving Tree, there's a boy and a tree. The boy enjoys the tree. He jumps up and plays in the tree's branches, and he picks the apples and eats them, and he loves the tree, and the tree loved the boy. The boy needed something, so the tree said, take my apples and go and sell them. You can make the money that you need. The boy comes back years later, I need something else. Well, take this, take my branches, and you can have it. I need a boat. Take my stump, take my trunk, you can have it. Decades go by, and the boy comes back as a man, a very old and haggard man. He takes off his hat, and he says to the tree, hi, tree. And the tree says, boy, I have nothing to give you. I've given you everything that I have. And he says, I just need something to sit on. So there's only a stump left, and the boy sits on the stump and rests. And the tree loved the boy, and the boy loved the tree. That idea of a stump remaining is kind of where the prophet is going. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and the branch from his roots shall bear fruit. There is a stump that is basically worthless. What does a farmer do with a stump? He hitches a tractor to the stump and he pulls it out. Or maybe in some areas they hook up some C4 to the stump and they blow it out of the water. But the stump is in the way. When you go to plow your field, if you have a stump in the middle of the field, the stump is it's dead weight. It's in the way. This is how Jesse's line is described. David, the king, one of the mightiest kings that Israel will ever know, is recognized as a stump. The tree has been cut low, and there's nothing left except this thing of worthlessness in the field that no one knows, no one cares for, and no one wants. This is how David's line has come to be seen. The king of Israel, the king who united all of the lands, and now his ultimate throne is worthless. When people look at Israel, when they look at Judah, there's nothing there. And yet, there's this idea of hope. A branch shall come out of the roots and shall bear fruit. This dead tree that has been there fallow without any fruit, out of this dead tree will rise a shoot, a little twig, of such a weak little sapling of a tree out of the stump that it can be swayed back and forth by the wind. And yet that little twig shall bear fruit and shall change the course of history for humankind. And when I think back to 2016 and the hard time that we had, there are parts of 2016 that I really enjoyed and parts of 2016 that I say, man, I'm ready to do away with it. But I look at the hope that comes from the Messiah, and my heart is renewed. When Isaiah is sharing this prophecy, he's trying to help the people to understand you have a king that is coming out of something that you thought was worthless. Your tribes have been demolished. Your cities have been invaded. Your people have been carried off. And only a remnant of people, the left behind, the leftovers, the worthless, the people that they didn't think could mount any type of attack against the occupying force. Those are the people that were left behind. And they're left behind in a land that is basically desolate and has been invaded by foreigners that have come and taken over the best of the property. And Isaiah says, there is coming one that will rise up and provide us hope and new life. This shoot coming from the stump of Jesse is signifying the royal family that was devastated and destroyed, and is hearkening back to this covenant of royalty that exists within the line of David. Even to use the name Jesse is almost a derogatory term toward the Messiah who would come from the line of David, because Jesse was a nobody. David was the king, the mighty king. He comes from Jesse, a line of nobodies. No one knew who Jesse was of Bethlehem. No one knew who he was before David had been picked, had been selected by God to become the king of Israel. And so by claiming that this new branch is going to come out of Jesse, he's coming out of a family that was worthless into a line of royalty that will change the course of history. In verse 2, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. I think back to the baptism, the transfiguration, where the Spirit of the Lord rests on Jesus. And what happens in that moment where the Spirit of the Lord rests on Jesus? God looks down and says, this is my Son, and with him I am well pleased. We have this idea of God mixing with Jesus, becoming one with Jesus when the Spirit of the Lord rests on him. And the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon the Messiah, and he will come. He will have the Spirit without measure, and he will now see through new eyes and hear through new ears, and his judgment shall be perfect. It says, verse 3, his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He won't judge by what his eyes see or what his ears hear, but instead he will judge by righteousness. Now this is altogether different from any king or from many kings that we have seen in history. If you go back to the history books, you see the kings. You can mark the kings by either being completely destructive to their country and being self-centered, to helping their country, but eventually they die, and the next king that comes will, again, start to tear apart the country. Very rarely do you see a selfless king. And then, again, the Jews expected that Jesus was going to ride into Jerusalem on a triumphant steed and was going to wipe out the Romans. And this is not the Jesus that we see. In fact, the prince that comes from the stump of Jesse is to be a prince of peace. If you go back a couple of chapters in Isaiah, he talks about the prince of peace. And this prince of peace is going to help the wolf dwell with the lamb, and the leopard lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and fatted calf together. He's going to help all of these animals that have enmity and strife between them. He's going to remove that enmity and strife. He's going to take away that sin, that plague that gets people and animals to fight and to continually be quarrelsome with each other. He's going to remove that. And in the absence of all that negativity, he's going to restore his peace for mankind. This is the Prince of Peace that we see in the Messiah. Out of a lowly and broken stump will come a tender, weak branch that will change the course of history. Imagine the irony in that message. I think this is most closely embodied in the story in John chapter 4, when Jesus restores peace to a woman's life. You can turn there if you wish, but I'm going to summarize it. There's a woman who has been devastated by her husbands, by her town, by her society. She has had multiple husbands, and she's now living with a man that is not her husband. And she has been, she's gone through relationship after relationship, and no one wants anything to do with her. No one in the town will actually deal with her. She's an outcast. She's a pariah. And Jesus comes to the well in the middle of the town during the middle of the day when no one goes to the well. And he sits there, and the woman approaches him to have a conversation. And he says, I'd like a drink of water. She says, sir, how are you going to have a drink of water? You have no bucket to draw water out of the well. And Jesus says, you're right. But I have water that is eternal and everlasting and will well up within you over and over and over again to refresh and cleanse your life. Jesus looked in her eyes and saw in her heart and knew that this is a woman who has been devastated by her circumstances and the world around her. And he said, I have something renewing and refreshing for your life. And it will never cease. It will continually well up within you. This is the Prince of Peace that Isaiah is talking about, who comes and looks after the poor, looks after the brokenhearted, looks after those that have been disenfranchised, looks after those that are sick and lame and diseased. And when no one would touch them, when no one would go near them, he goes and he puts a hand on them and he heals them and he restores them back to full health and he brings them back into society. This is the Prince of Peace that turns upside down the entire world around him. When people thought that he was going to come in on a gallant steed, he comes in a lowly manger, and yet he does everything backwards. He goes to the low, he goes to the poor, he goes to the oppressed, and he starts reconnecting people in ways that they never thought possible. This is the Prince of Peace that we see in Isaiah chapter 11. And I think if we're going to understand this Prince of Peace, we have to understand that his desire is to take out the fear of all that is unholy, all that is negative, to remove that and to replace it with something that is altogether greater. Go to verse 9 with me. They shall not hurt or destroy. When I come into the scene, when I come into the picture, the people that I touch, the lives that I touch, they shall not destroy. In all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. My job as the Messiah, as the Prince of Peace, is to come in and to bring humanity back into relationship with God. This idea of the earth being full of the knowledge of the Lord harkens us back to the Garden of Eden. When there was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the whole purpose of being the humans being in the Garden of Eden with God is to have a relationship with God. And once they sinned, that relationship was broken. And they were no longer able to have intimate knowledge of God. They were no longer able to walk hand in hand with God and speak to him daily in a way that was to be untouched for the rest of time. Go back to the Garden of Eden, and that was broken. Jesus says, when I come back, the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the Lord. I point you back to the knowledge of God. So my job as the Prince of Peace is to bring a kingdom of righteousness that is altogether different from anything that you have ever known. That is why I have come. And I am going to restore peace to humanity in a way that covers over brokenness and throws out the sin and allows us to have full and healthy and fulfilled lives. How many of you made a New Year's resolution this year? Anyone? I've stopped doing it. I told my family yesterday I was going to start with a sermon on gluttony this morning. Because I thought, hey, if we're going to talk about New Year's, we might as well just talk about the elephant in the room. And that is the overeating that happens on New Year's Eve. For some reason, we get in our minds, or maybe this is just just me. Maybe I'm just putting the plural to you guys, but this is just what I do. But I see the food on Thanksgiving, and I don't stop seeing the food until New Year's Day. Right? You're nodding your head, so I guess that you're in the same boat. And we have this idea that when New Year's comes, I'm going to make a wonderful resolution. I'm going to change my life. Let's be honest. The gym memberships go up in January, they go back down in February. This is a real thing. All of the, for those of you that follow like Pinterest and Instagram and some of those things, everyone's posting their New Year's resolutions and all the things that they're going to do, and they're going to get fit, and they're going to eat healthier, and so they're pinning all these new recipes so that they can have a healthier new life. And my question is, why didn't we do it back in July? Why didn't we do it back in March of last year? Why did we wait until the new year? There's something about the new year that helps us to just say, that last year is done. I'm moving on with my life. There's something about that hope of throwing out the old and going into a new that reminds us of Jesus, the Messiah. I'm throwing out the old, and I'm giving you a chance to be renewed. If you're following along and you're taking notes, number one, if I am to accept the peace of Christ, I must patiently await the hope of his kingdom and his righteousness. If I am to accept the peace of Christ, I must patiently await the hope of his kingdom and his righteousness. And I'm not talking about a lottery ticket hope, right? There was a lot of, back when the Powerball was up at like 300 and something million, and it continued to climb and climb and climb, and it was like an escalating graph. You know, it was like everyone saw the Powerball was up so high, and so everyone was going out and buying lottery tickets, which would push the Powerball up higher. And eventually I think there's like 3 people that all won on the same day or something like that. So they ended up splitting the prize across 3 people. And you could sense that everyone's hopes were just deflated. Like, I bought a Powerball ticket and I didn't win, and my hopes have gone out the window. That is not the hope that I am talking about with Jesus. I'm not talking about this lottery ticket hope where I'm hoping that my life will be changed by getting a little bit more money. But you know what happens when you get more money? You get more problems. You get more issues. And you get just a different set of circumstances in which you have to live. You don't do away with the human condition just because you get more money. You still live in the same human condition. The hope that I'm talking about with Jesus is one that is altogether different from the life that we have lived in the past. And that is, even if you have been a Christian for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, that is, that when you wake up tomorrow, you have an opportunity to live a new day under Jesus Christ. You have an opportunity to live refreshed and renewed and restored under the peace of God. That is the hope that we find in Jesus Christ. There's not a change in our circumstances, but rather a change in our heart. And this comes with the knowledge of the Lord being filling the earth. Secondly, verse 10, in that day the root of Jesse shall stand as a signal for all peoples, and of him the nations shall inquire. How many of you have seen the movie The Patriot? Okay, a couple of you? This is Mel Gibson stars in this movie. I loved it. I would watch it all the time. For some reason, I'm drawn to the Revolutionary War. It is what it is. Live with me. But I love this movie, and at the very end, this is the battle between America and Britain. At the very end, there's a battle in which Mel Gibson has his troops lined up, and the British have their troops lined up across from them. They fire around, Britons fire around, and they go back and forth, and eventually the line breaks, and the soldiers start running the opposite direction. And quite frankly, I probably would too. If there were bullets flying in my direction, I'd probably run. They start running, and eventually the redcoats, the Britons, start to take the field, and they start to have more and more small little victories encamped throughout the battlefield. Mel Gibson sees that his troops are running away, And he sees a boy who is holding a flag that's getting ready to throw the flag, the American flag, down and run with them. And he runs and he grabs the flag and he starts waving the flag and saying, "Push forward! Push forward!" The idea of the American flag is this. It symbolizes our hope, our freedom, our law, our constitution, our new life in a land that is altogether different from what we had known in the past. The flag is a symbol and the representation of America itself. Isaiah says, "In that day, the Messiah shall stand as the signal for all the people." What does it mean for the Messiah to be the flag? The standard by which all people rally and the one to point people to God. Well, the Messiah is not only the Prince of Peace, but he's the sign and the banner that rallies people to God, and all nations and people who fear and know the Lord will look to the Messiah for protection and peace. Go down to verse 12, or skip verse 11 for right now. He will raise a signal for the nations and will assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. There's this idea that the banner or the symbol stands high for all to see, and all people from all corners of the earth rally behind him in search of the knowledge of God. That the Messiah is the one to unite humanity under his banner. He is the signal, he is the sign, he is the outcry to people to say, this is how you find God. So not only does he come to bring peace and to bring righteousness and to bring restoration and to bring everything that every prince in the past has not done, but also this king, this prince, this Messiah, this Jesus comes so that all people might see him and be pointed to God. That is what he does. And it's not just that Israel is pointed to God, but it's that Israel and Ephraim and the Philistines and the Ammonites and the Egyptians and every land that has destroyed Israel up until this point, or been an enemy of Israel up until this point, all of them are allowed to unite under the banner of Jesus Christ. That is what he came to do when he is the symbol. He's raised up as a standard for all to see. And it's hard, it's difficult for us sometimes when we think of Jesus, because that means that we have enemies that we might have to unite with. Abraham Lincoln, when he was elected president, he was asked, "What are you going to do to your enemies?" And this is his response: "I'm going to destroy them. I'm going to make them my friends." Jesus changes things around and says, your enemies are not your enemies under my banner. Think about your work environment. Think about your home life. Think about your family, your parents, your children. Think about your neighbors. Think about the situations that you find yourselves in regularly, weekly. There are people that you find yourself at odds with, right? The Messiah's purpose is to unite people into one body, one standard, one way of life. They're not fractions, they're not different groups and different peoples, there's one. And under him, everyone is pointed to God in the same way. When Jesus was arguing with the Pharisees, fast forward to the New Testament, he walks into the synagogue and he opens the text and he starts reading, and they start to argue with him. Well, that's not what that means, and that's not what that means. And Jesus says, you guys have lost sight of what the true intent of God's law is. It is to unite humanity with God. And you've been nitpicking it. You've been pulling it apart, saying, I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to live my life my own way. And Jesus says, that's not for you to decide. You don't get to live your life your own way. You live your life according to God's law and God's commands. That is what we are called to do. But you've lost sight of that. You've lost focus on that. And that's why he has so many arguments with the chief priests and the Pharisees and the scribes and everyone who was learned at that time. He says, you can almost throw all of that out if you are not going to obey God. In fact, Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven, that is the one that will be able to be in my kingdom. The one who does the will of my Father. And Jesus is sent, the Messiah is sent to be the signal, the banner for all of us to unite underneath. And I imagine that in this moment, as Jesus is rallying the people and raising the signal for all nations to see, the Lord bringing redemption and freedom to his people, and the enmity that is between people, the brokenness, the strife, that he's removing that and saying that's not even something that you can argue about anymore. Imagine with me two toddlers, two 3-year-olds. What do toddlers do when there are two of them and one toy? Okay, so you're imagining with me. Jesus says, I remove the toy. You have nothing to argue about anymore because you don't even have a toy in front of you. I'm removing the conflict and I am replacing it with my presence. I restore. I bring you back to God. When I think of the Messiah coming to bring peace to the world and new life, and to restore people from their transgressions, I think of someone who is literally taking the conflict and the issues that cause us conflict away, and he's giving us something different. Point 2, if I'm going to accept the peace of Christ, I must recognize that Jesus is my example and my standard for faithful living. Because it's not just good enough for me to say, yes, I claim to be a God follower and not actually follow God. It's not good enough for me to read the Bible and then not put it into practice. Jesus says, I have come so that you might have life in me. I fulfill the law and the prophets. I fulfill the scripture. So if you follow my example and you live like I live, then you can be united with God. And I'm the one who brings that union together. So Jesus, if I am to accept the peace of Christ, I must recognize that Jesus is my example and my standard for living. Anything else should fall away. And only my representation of God through Jesus remain. We'll move on to verse 11. Not only does the Messiah bring about a reign of peace and faithful living, but he brings back the remnant of God's people that have been living broken and hopeless lives. And this is where we join in the story. Okay, so think back to 2016 and the conflict and the struggles and the problems that you had back in that year, just like one day ago, right? Think back to that. And now, imagine with me, you have a remnant of God's people who have been faithful, who have been scattered throughout the earth. They've been left as the castaways, the leftovers, the ones who were not even worth saving because no one thought they could do anything with their lives. These are the people that God reaches down and sweeps back to himself with his hand. In verse 11, in that day, the Lord will extend his hand. God is going to be personal with humanity. He's going to sweep his hand down, and he is going to recover the remnant that remains of his people. When I think back to the life that we lived last year, as we try to remain faithful, there are people that are going to say, is it worth staying steadfast in Jesus Christ? Unfortunately, that's a question that comes up a lot. Is it worth remaining steadfast in Jesus Christ? And the prophet says, only those that were the remnant, those that were the leftovers, those that were faithful all the way until the end, those are the ones that God reaches down and scoops up with his hand. And we think, is there ever going to be a time where I will not have this conflict? Is there ever going to be a time when I will not have this issue? People come in for counseling and they say, I've been struggling with this for a very, very long time. I've been dealing with this for years. When is it going to end? When will it stop? That all depends on whether you believe the first half of this text. Do you believe that Jesus is the Prince of Peace? Do you believe that he came to live under a banner of righteousness? Do you believe that he came to judge under righteousness rather than superficial issues and ideas? Do you believe that he is and was royalty? Do you believe that he has something more powerful for your life? Or do you just believe that he is someone and something that can carry you forward for a time until something better comes along? World War II. They were the Allies, the Allied forces, and against the main German force. And there were people that would swap sides. And they would swap sides based on whatever was convenient. So if the Germans offer me a sum of money to do a particular thing, then hey, I'm gonna do that. But it wasn't just money. If the Germans offer me protection and safety and security, then I'm gonna follow them. And if I follow the Germans for a while, but the Allies say, hey, but we can offer you something more, then I might switch sides again. Well, at the end of the war, after the conflict has been settled and resolved, there are people that have flopped sides back and forth. Do you know what happened to these people that changed their authority and their allegiance? They were shot as traitors. It wasn't good enough to claim a side. You had to remain steadfast with your side. Because if you claim a side and then switch when it's convenient, do you really have any allegiance at all? Your allegiance is temporary. And that ultimately is what we find ourselves doing in this life. We pledge allegiance to our country, to our job, to our family, to our community, to our church. We pledge allegiance in many different forms, in many different areas. But what we are doing often is we're pledging allegiance for a temporary time. Young adults today, in the American workforce, if you go back to the 40s and the 50s, you would have seen adults working the same job for their entire lives, possibly two jobs if they ended up switching their career once. But generally speaking, they would have one career for their entire life. Young adults today are going to have a minimum of 5 jobs. And for some, they're going to have a minimum of 5 jobs before the age of 25. They swap all the time. We have a mentality that whatever I go for that offers me the best value at this moment in time, that is what I am going to serve. And then when something else comes along, I'm going to jump to that thing, and I'm going to jump to the next thing, I'm going to jump to the next thing. But what we miss is that God is reaching down with his personal hand, intimately wanting to connect with humanity, saying, you can connect to me through the Messiah, Jesus Christ. He is your standard of righteousness. He is your banner under which you unite. And you can join me if you will be faithful all the way till the end. And unfortunately, the list of people that have been faithful and will remain faithful until the end has grown very short. And I don't mean that to be pessimistic. I don't mean that to be a downer as we get to the end of the sermon. But what I mean that to be is an eye-opening experience to help us to understand that my loyalty to Christ is something that I start at one point and I continue on and I persist in for the rest of my life. It's not something that I do for a year. That's why New Year's resolutions, I say throw them out the window. Because at some point you have to make a decision, I'm going to eat right or I'm not going to eat right. At some point you have to make a decision, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to live a healthy life or I won't live a healthy life. At some point you make a decision, I'm going to continue in this destructive habit or I am not. And New Year's means nothing if you don't make the decision to move forward with a change in your life. So when I think of 2016 and the opportunity to flip the calendar over and to have a new page in front of us, resting before our eyes, then I say this to you, brothers and sisters. We have an opportunity to unite under Jesus Christ and to have him change and renovate our lives. Are we willing to take it? There's an opportunity to unite under Jesus Christ, to be intimately close with God. But if we are not making the most of that opportunity. And we are squandering the Messiah's birth, his life, his death, his resurrection, his sacrifice on our behalf. If I am going to accept the peace of Christ, I must remain faithful as a true follower of God. To claim to be a follower of God is one thing. To live faithfully under the banner of the Messiah is altogether something different. You have options that might seem better, and I put that in quotes. You have options that might seem better in this life. My encouragement is for you to think through your alliance, your allegiance to Christ as the only option that will sustain you long term. Anything else is going to be a short-sighted misgiving. 2016, you may have trusted in the power and the might of something that crumbled, or you might have just been living your life normally. When disaster struck you and your family, in the midst of our calendar changeover, would you consider the alliances in your life that are truly valuable? Would you consider trusting in Jesus' meekness and weakness, who ultimately proves to be the long-term powerhouse? And would you think about the Prince of Peace as your personal Messiah who has come to truly change your life and to remove the conflict, to remove the sin, to remove the judgment from you, and to instill instead a life of peace and generosity and charity and love and trust? You have before you two options, and you have to think through how long you're going to live faithfully with these two options. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, to close, was imprisoned. And while he was in prison, he gathered together a group of men, and they talked philosophy, they talked religion, they talked life. Anything that they wanted to talk about. I mean, what else are you going to do while you're in prison? And so he writes letters while he's in prison. And as a prisoner, he sends these letters out to family and to friends, and he writes poetry. And this is a poem that I thought was appropriate, written in the year 1945, the last year of the war. When Dietrich Bonhoeffer writes about the new year, with every power for good to stay and guide me, comforted and inspired beyond all fear, I've lived these days with you in thought beside me, and pass with you into the coming year. The old year still torments our hearts, unhastening. The long days of our sorrow still endure. Father, grant to the souls thou hast been chastening, that thou hast promised the healing and the cure. Give us, those that have been seeking after you and longing for you, peace in our hearts. Should it be ours to drain the cup of grieving, even to the dregs of pain, at thy command, we will not falter, thankfully receiving all that is given by your loving hand. But should it be thy will once more to release us to life's enjoyment and to good sunshine, that we find ourselves out of prison, that which we've learned from sorrow shall increase us in all our life to dedicate as thine. Today let candles shed their radiant greeting. Lo, on our darkness are they not thy light, leading us happily to our longed-for meeting. Thou canst illuminate even our darkest night. You are the only one that illuminates my path. When now the silence deepens our hearkening, grant we may hear thy children's voices raise. From all the unseen world around us darkening, their universal keen in thy praise. While all the powers of good aid and attend us, boldly we'll face the future, be it what may. At even and at morning, God will befriend us, and oh, most securely on the New Year's Day. Brothers and sisters, we have before us an opportunity for new life. And we are not imprisoned, except to live the life that we've been given, the circumstances that we find ourselves in daily. It is our choice to choose light or darkness. And that is where we leave us this morning. Would you stand? God, I pray that you would speak to our hearts individually. Lord, that as we find ourselves thinking through changes and thinking through options and thinking through alliances and allegiances and thinking through the way in which we should live our lives versus the way that we have lived our lives, Lord, we're all confronted with this, that you are here to save and preserve us and rescue us. And Lord, for that we give you thanks. And for those that are struggling with that decision, or struggling with making you their Lord, or struggling to even just live under your banner and under your lordship. Lord, I pray that you would grant them peace and grant them strength to step out this morning, to have a conversation with you. Lord, that you would speak to our hearts and help us to understand the way in which we can change to live more faithfully for you as your remnant, as your people, as the leftovers, the cast away from society. But Lord, all the same, we will be loyal to you, knowing that you point us and you connect us to God. And this morning we pray that you would deal deeply with our hearts through your Spirit, for change, for renewal, for peace, and for hope. In Jesus' name. You have an opportunity to spend some time in prayer with people that are waiting and willing to pray with you. And if it's just a simple prayer, as in, I need help for the new year, I encourage you to take the time now, whether it's here at the altar or in your seat, to process and to pray over God's will for your life and the changes that He has in store for you. That you can take Jesus to those that don't know him, or those that don't recognize him, or those who don't claim him, and that you can share him with them. those people